Recognizing the financial challenges faced by people with disabilities, such as limited savings and high living expenses, the Canadian government introduced the Registered Disability Savings Plan, or RDSP, in 2008. This instrumental program serves as a vital tool empowering people with disabilities and their families to attain greater financial security and independence. Joining us today is Liss Cairns, a dedicated professional from Plan Institute, an organization dedicated to sharing vital insights and improving the lives of people with disabilities and their families. So we look forward to gaining valuable insights from Liss about the RDSP program and its impact to our community. So thank you, Liss, for chatting with us today. To start, can you please provide an overview of what the Registered Disability Savings Plan is and its primary objectives?
Yeah, absolutely. So the RDSP at its core was designed to be a long-term savings plan for people with disabilities that acts almost like a pension replacement. So Plan Institute was one of the organizations involved in the movement to advocate for and establish the RDSP. And it was a group of parents primarily that set out to try to figure out, okay, well, how do I set up a good financial future for my child with a disability when they are in their retirement years and I am no longer around. So, of course, now the RDSP has a much wider scope than that. We support people both with disabilities and people who are supporting people with disabilities. Really, the RDSP was designed to act similarly to a registered retirement savings plan in that it's meant to be accessed when somebody is older in life, nearing their sort of retirement ages. But it acts a little bit more closely to a registered education savings plan, and that's because the government is going to provide contributions to it. Now, the RDSP is definitely the most advantageous of all registered savings plans, definitely in Canada. I think potentially in the world. I'm not sure if there's a savings plan quite like this. I know Canada was the world's first. I'd love it if there were more, so I hope I'm wrong about that now. Um, in order to qualify for the RDSP, somebody needs to be a Canadian resident. Now, this doesn't mean they must be a permanent resident or have Canadian citizenship, but rather there's somebody who is eligible to file and pay taxes within Canada. They must be under the year in which they turn 60 to open the RDSP. And there's also some government contributions that can come in. So there's up to $20,000 of bonds. Those are up to $1,000 per year just by having the RDSP open and meeting the low income criteria, which is around $32,000 family income for the year. There's also grants, and so that has a much higher income threshold of about $100,000 to receive the maximum, which is up to $3,500 per year. And you would need to deposit some money to get that. So generally, if your income is below that, you would want to deposit $1,500 or about $125 per month, and you would get that. That's because the government will do a 3-to-1 matching on the first $500 and then a 2-to-1 matching on the next $1,000 that you deposit into the account. But those government contributions can only be received up until the end of the year the beneficiary or the person with the disability tax credit turns 49. Which leads me to the next criteria outside of those age limits is that somebody must qualify for the disability tax credit in order to open up the savings plan. So once they are a resident, have a valid social insurance number, are the correct age, and have the disability tax credit, pretty much any financial institution in Canada offers the RDSP at this point. And so you can figure out what would work best for you and open it up that way. As well, outside of the government grants and bonds that you can get, you can deposit up to $200,000 in personal contributions, whether that's from yourself or somebody that you give permission to put money into that account. And then that money plus the grants and bonds and any investment or income or interest that's earned within the account is exempt for all federal benefits. So things like Canada Pension Plan, Old Age Security, Guaranteed Income Supplement, that'll never factor in your RDSP. And then also almost every province and territory has also exempted the RDSP. So for example, if you're in Ontario receiving the Ontario Disability Supports program or ODSP monthly benefit, that does not count your RDSP money towards eligibility. So completely exempt. And so a really great way to save money without worrying about impacting those other benefits that you might currently or possibly in the future be receiving.
Perfect. And do you know what is the procedure to get the disability tax credit in order to apply for the RDSP?
So, with a disability tax credit, so at its core, it's a non-refundable tax credit. And so, with this, that means some people might be able to pay less money in taxes. They can transfer it to an eligible family caregiver, and they can claim that if they provide them with regular food, shelter, or clothing. Um, and the DTC, once it's approved, opens up the door for other benefits like the RDSP. Now, to apply for the disability tax credit, and this is something that Plan Institute can provide support with through our helpline team, but also there's some free online tools as well, like Disability Alliance BC has a free DTC tool and some help sheets on their website. And really, the disability tax credit is a form that is completed by a medical practitioner. So there's sort of part A of the form, which is the applicant to complete. That's either the person with the disability or their caregiver or their guardian who's filling that out. And the section B of the form is quite long and we'll go over the different areas of daily living. So, in order to qualify for the DTC, somebody must have a prolonged disability, meaning it has lasted or is expected to last at least 1 year. And outside of that, the disability must also be severe. So, there's a few different ways to qualify under that. So, the first one would be if you are severely restricted, or sorry, markedly restricted in one area of daily living. Now, the activities of daily living, if I hope I can remember those correctly, are vision, hearing, walking, toileting, or eliminating, as they call it. Preparing food, which also includes eating food as well, dressing, the mental functions necessary for daily life, and vision. I think there may be another one on there, but it's on the form. And so in all of those different sections, your medical practitioner would fill out, what are your impairments? How does this disability impact you on on your in your daily life? So if you qualify or if you're very, very restricted in one area of those daily living, so let's say, for example, you can't do an activity or you need a significant amount of help to do an activity. So let's say, for example, somebody had mobility challenges. They either weren't able to walk at all, or maybe they could only walk, say, from the bedroom to the bathroom, and then they would need to be using a wheelchair or a scooter or something to get around. That would likely be a market restriction. And so they would qualify just under that walking category. Now, the second way to qualify for the DTC is if somebody was a little bit less restricted, but in multiple of those areas. So I can use my wife as an example. So she is somebody who has ADHD, she has depression, somatic symptom disorder, and she also has a kind of mystery physical condition that we're still looking for a diagnosis of. And so for her, she has impairments within the mental functions necessary for daily living category. But her mental health and her physical disability also means that she has restrictions under the walking category, the food category, under the walking, or I think I already said that category, and dressing as well sometimes. So if you still need help or you take, for example, 3 times longer or 2 times longer than someone else your same age to do those activities, or just have, again, restrictions in multiple areas that really impacts your life, you could qualify under the cumulative effects of impairment. And so that's the other way. And then the third option is if you require life-sustaining therapy. And so this is medically necessary treatment that keeps you alive, it supports a vital function. So for example, if you're somebody who has type 1 diabetes, you would qualify under that category. There's actually been some new changes to the DTC over the last few years. So now somebody who has type 1 diabetes will automatically qualify for the disability tax credit without having to put in more information. Also, if somebody was needing kidney dialysis or some other type of treatment that happens either at least twice a week or at least 14 hours a week. So either one of those options would work for that. A medical doctor and a nurse practitioner can certify all sections of the form, and the categories will have different medical practitioners that can fill it out depending on their specialty. So, for example, an audiologist can fill out the hearing section, occupational therapist can fill out the walking section, psychologist for mental functions, and so on and so forth. Basically, once the form is complete, either digitally or through the paper application, it can be submitted directly to the CRA. If it's the digital version, that's already through your My CRA account. It'll be submitted that way, and the medical practitioner has their own back-end access to go ahead and submit their portion of the form. Or if you're doing a paper copy of that, you can mail or fax that into the CRA as well, and the information will be on the sheet. It'll usually take about 3 or 4 months for the government to say that to make a decision. You'll either be approved, which could be for a certain number of years or indefinitely. If you do have a permanent disability or one that's likely to remain permanent, but the CRA gives you, say, a 5-year or a 10-year DTC approval date, you can request they reconsider that decision, usually with a note from your medical practitioner explaining why it should have a longer approval date or possibly indefinite. The CRA outside of approval may also send a follow-up questionnaire to your medical practitioner, not really looking for new information, but just to verify the information that was submitted, answer any additional questions that have come up. And then the third option would be that you are declined. And I will say that people are often declined for the DTC, especially on their first try, not necessarily because they don't qualify. Often it's because the CRA is looking for very specific wording and very specific examples to really emphasize how your disability impacts you or how the person you're supporting. And the CRA is not made up of medical practitioners, so all the information that's on the form is what they're going to base their decision off of. So we really encourage you to work with an advocate or just someone along the way to kind of help you through that. Maybe review the application before it's submitted if possible, and really make sure that you're providing very specific examples as to how your disability impacts you, so that you can hopefully have a better chance of getting approved. But as well, if you're declined, you can always provide more information, request a reconsideration of that decision, and if it still doesn't work out, you can always reapply. There's no limit to how many times you can apply for the disability tax credit. And so we know that even if you may not qualify now, you could potentially qualify later on or circumstances change. So that's basically what the process is for that.
And it's really important that you can reapply because I've
Mhm,
heard that many people think that if you don't get it the first time, that's your only chance. So knowing this is really important for them. And as you said, it's important to try to make this application with someone that knows what they're asking for, so
mhm,
you can have a higher chance to get the first time on approval.
mhm.
So do you know what are some misconceptions or challenges that people face when it comes to RDSP?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good one. I think that trying to think of some of the most common misconceptions. I think actually it really varies. I think there tends to be a lot of misunderstanding or confusions around the RDSP, both in terms of like whether you can have an RDSP and other types of saving plans as well, what the age limits are for getting those grants and bonds, how withdrawals work within the account. So it really depends on the individual. And two, I think even though this plan has been around since 2008, it's still not the most well-known plan by financial institutions. And so sometimes we find that there's misinformation or incorrect information that is being passed on to people, not maliciously or with any ill intent, but just because it can be quite a complicated plan. What I will say is that it's best to kind of start the process as early as possible. Sometimes we'll get parents or guardians who will reach out and say, "Oh, my child has a disability and they might qualify for the DTC. Is there any benefit to me opening up the RDSP when they're still a minor? Or should I wait until they're an adult and the family income used for the grants and bonds is their own?" And for that, I would say it's good to start early, even if they might not be eligible for as much of the bond or or sorry, if they're not eligible for any bond or as much of the grant. And I'll just clarify here that When I'm talking about family income, for a beneficiary who's in the year they turn 18 and under, it's going to be their parents or legal guardians' family income that determines grant and bond eligibility. And then once they're in the year they're 19, even if they can't be the own holder of their own RDSP account, um, then the family income will be based on their income plus the income of any spouse or common law partner that they have. And so, as long as their income taxes are filed starting 2 years back, because the government looks 2 years back at the beginning of this year, that's the most readily available data that they have, then it'll be based on their income when they're 19 and should be a pretty seamless transition.
Okay. And I know you already said it, but the age limit to the RDSP, like to all get it, is 16, right?
60, yeah. So somebody can open the
Okay.
RDSP up until the end of the year they turn 59. Now,
Okay.
those government contributions, so that up to $20,000 in bonds, don't require any personal contributions, just require that the account is opened, and that up to $70,000 of grants, which does require some personal contributions to get that. Those can only be received up until the end of the year the beneficiary turns 49. And you might be wondering why those age limits are different. And so I can clarify that and say that that's because there's two rules that are competing within the RDSP. So the first one is a rule called the 10-year or proportional repayment rule. Now, this rule states that if any of those government contributions have been deposited into the RDSP within the last 10 years, then any withdrawal from the RDSP is going to cause a repayment of those grants and bonds at a rate of $3 for every $1 you take out. So, really, because this plan was designed to be a long term savings plan, I think that the government wanted to disincentivize or make it less ideal for somebody to take money out early, knowing that it was designed for somebody's retirement years. Now, outside of that 10-year rule, withdrawals must start from the RDSP no later than the end of the year the beneficiary turns 60. And so these withdrawals that come from the plan, there's two different options. The one that is required at every financial institution and what everyone who is, 60 years old and above that has an RDSP will be receiving is called the Lifetime Disability Assistance Payments, or LDAPs. And so this is basically that pension amount. So in the year you turn 60, basically the government will, there's very complex formulas to figure out, but basically it'll look at, okay, how much money is in my RDSP? How many years do I have until I'm 83 years old? And then divide that. So let's say, I'm just going to do a very easy example. Let's say by the time you're 60, you have $230,000 in your RDSP. You've got 23 years until you're age 83. You divide $230,000 by 23. You could expect to get about $10,000 per year from your RDSP. Now, this can be either provided annually, it can be divided to be done monthly, quarterly, sometimes twice a year, depends on the financial institution. And so that recalculates basically every year. And if it's still being invested, your payments usually are a bit higher as you get older in age. There is the possibility that the RDSP and those payments will continue on past the age of 83 if there are investments and things like that. But that's typically the age folks might see their RDSP being depleted. And so, because we have those mandatory withdrawals that have to start in the year you turn 60, but we've got that 10-year rule that if you take any withdrawal and there's been grants and bonds in the last 10 years, those will be repaid. They had to put the cutoff age for the grants and bonds at 49 so that when those mandatory withdrawals start at age 60, they don't have to worry about any penalty or any payback to have that.
Okay. Okay, yeah, a little bit tricky that.
Mhm.
And now more like a personal question for you, like
Mm.
what motivated you to get involved with the RDSP and to advocate for people with disabilities?
Yeah, so I've actually been with Plan Institute since about 2017. And so while I'm currently in the process of, well, actually, my wife and I have submitted our disability tax credit application. So we're just eagerly awaiting the CRA's decision to see if we qualify and can open up an RDSP for ourselves. But I started back at Plan Institute in 2017 in an intern role, and then I've moved through different roles since then. So now I'm one of the program managers. And really, one of the partners partnerships that Plan Institute is involved with is called Access RDSP. And so this is a collaboration between three nonprofit organizations. Plan Institute is national, but BC Aboriginal Network on Disability Society and Disability Alliance BC are more BC based. And so this partnership was formed in 2016 with the hopes of removing barriers and increasing uptake to the RDSP. And so since I've started with Plan Institute, it's been a huge focus of my work. And I also currently manage our free disability planning helpline service. I support our RDSP and Wills Choice and Estate Planning workshops and webinars. And so through that, I've developed a lot of RDSP knowledge, and I'm such an advocate for empowering people with disabilities in multiple different areas, but especially around financial security. I feel like even though it's one part of overall well-being, it can be such a key factor in setting somebody up, not having to worry about losing other benefits that they have, saving some money aside. Whereas, before the RDSP, that wasn't possible. There's all those clawbacks that come in from benefits. And so really, I've just become more passionate about that. And I am now one of our sort of RDSP experts on our team. And so I'm happy to try to spread the word and try to clarify some of those more complicated aspects of the plan.
Yeah, yeah, because as it's a financial tool, it's sometimes hard to understand. So it's pretty
Mhm.
cool. And can you share an example of how the RDSP has helped someone overcoming a significant challenge related to their disability and how maybe they achieve a sense of independence or self-sufficiency thanks to that?
Yeah. So I have an example that actually was brought up at the event that I was at this morning. And so there's an individual, I won't name her. She is somebody who is a traumatic brain injury survivor. And so she, in her, I think, 20s or around that time, she lost a significant amount of her cognitive abilities. And so she's had significant therapies and treatments since then, but developed quite a few disabilities from that. Now, this included having difficulty with reading and understanding large numbers, difficulty comprehending more complicated topics, having a full understanding of like financial responsibility and different things like that. And so their parents worked with them to help them apply for the disability tax credit and then open up an RDSP for them. Now, I think we're all, or at least most of us, especially at Plan Institute, are advocates for empowering people to be able to be as involved in their care, in their life, and their planning as they're able to do so. And so, with this parent, they were able to work with their adult child and open up the RDSP. And so, through opening up the RDSP, they opened it up in 2008 when they were first eligible to do so. And every single year, they were only putting in enough money to get the maximum grant contribution. So started putting money in 2008, have continued doing that $1,500 per year, plus a one-time around $20,000 inheritance from their grandmother that they were able to put in the account. And so they had that money in there. And so their parents would sit down with them every few months when they would get that RDSP statement, and they would say, okay, this is your RDSP. This is how much money is in there. And starting to really emphasize that financial literacy component. And so they would sit down and try to explain all the different components, have them repeat it back, and continue doing that. They've done that every year since then. And, before they had the RDSP, this individual had a very hard time, as I mentioned, reading and understanding numbers. They couldn't comprehend numbers over 100,000. And so with their RDSP, every year it would grow by a few $1,000s, continue to be invested. And now we're about 15 years into the RDSP. So over 15 years, they've been able to receive bonds for that time, grants for that time, putting in just the minimum to get those grants. And at this point in time, the RDSP is worth over $170,000. So this is something that they now can fully understand. They know how much money is in there. They can understand those larger numbers and feel that sense of peace and security and knowing, okay, I've got this layer of security here. And even when my parents are gone, I'll still be set up so that I can have a good life and choose what I want to do. So I think that's a good example to share.
It is heartwarming to know that they will be safe eventually in their future. So, and I think this showcased the importance of the family or friends when supporting their loved ones achieving their goals with the RDSP.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, some folks may not have a really large family or friend group. And I know we've had some people reach out and, start asking that question, who do you have that, supports you? And sometimes they'll say, oh, I don't really have anyone there. And what I will say and what I have said is that that's completely okay. There are thankfully so many wonderful advocates, nonprofit organizations, and service providers that are out there that can help guide and navigate the process and help access these benefits even without that support network that's there. And then potentially be able to access other services that might help to expand that network and build those relationships as well.
Perfect. That's perfect. Thank you for sharing that with us. What advice do you have for people who are considering opening the RDSP for themselves or their loved ones? Are
Yeah.
there long-term benefits of starting early, like you just mentioned some? What other advice do you have for them?
Yeah. I mean, I think my main piece of advice, and if, one thing that folks can take away is that starting early is key. That way, you get as many of those benefits as possible, as many of those government contributions, and that you can get the joy of compounding interest and having your money basically work for you while it's in that account. It's something that, even though it's not for now, and sometimes it can be really, really difficult to think about the future when right now might be difficult. But this is something that, as long as you can open it up, and especially for folks who are under the age of 49 and can get those bonds just by having the account open. Somebody who, let's say, for example, opens an RDSP in their 20s and they don't deposit any money into the RDSP, all they get is the $20,000 in bonds. If that money is being invested, at a rate of return. I was going to do an example, but I'm not very good at quick math. But even with just $20,000 in there, if it's being invested, it can grow to 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, and more dollars because it's been in the account longer, and that money is just continually growing and growing and growing. And so even if you can't put money into it, it can still do a lot for you. And because it doesn't impact your ability to access provincial or territorial and federal programs, you still have those other income supports available to you. And so really the RDSP would act as sort of a top up. I don't think any of us would suggest having the RDSP and only using the RDSP. There are those other programs that if you're eligible for, we would encourage you to take use of that. And as well, with parents and guardians, the same thing with their kids. Open it up, start saving, start putting money in there. Even if your family income is over $100,000 or you've had no income tax returns filed for the right years, you will still get up to $1,000 matched on the first $1,000 that you put into the RDSP. And so you can still get some of those grants, can still be getting that. And no matter what, all of that investment income, those personal contributions that have been saved there, that will always be the beneficiary. So that person who qualifies for the disability tax credit. And so, outside of starting early, I think you don't need to. The other piece of advice I would give is that you don't need to be an expert to start. So, there's a lot of help and resources along the way. And the thing is that if you open your RDSP and you don't love the financial institution or the way it's being managed, you can always transfer it later on down the road. So, you don't have to be an expert. Go ahead, get started. You can continue learning along the way, and it'll all work itself out in the end.
Yeah, that's true. And it's good to know that using the RDSP doesn't exclude you to be able to apply for other support programs. So it's a really complete financial tool, which is incredible. So as you've worked with the RDSP, can you share how the program has evolved and improved the lives of people with disability? Maybe what policy enhancements have occurred during the years?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're definitely still advocating for some changes within the RDSP. It's not perfect by any means. I won't say that it is, but there have been changes that have made to it that have made it more accessible, more inclusive, and more um, like yeah, just easier to use for folks. So for example, with the RDSP, there have been some changes in recent years around who can be the holder. So again, that's basically that person who manages the RDSP. They're working with the financial institution, choosing and approving investments and withdrawals, and making sure that the grants and bonds are coming in and everything is functioning well. For a child beneficiary, so someone who's under the age of majority in their province or territory, it has to be their parent or legal guardian who is the holder. Now, when that beneficiary becomes an adult, then they could become the holder as well of their RDSP. If it was their parent who was on as holder of the account, when that beneficiary becomes an adult, the parent can stay as a co-holder or a joint holder of the RDSP, so they can both be making those decisions together. The other considerations is really, does that adult beneficiary now have contractual competence? So this really is the ability to understand and enter into contracts. So things like you would find with a registered savings plan. So being able to understand not only what the plan is and how it operates, but what consequences you might face if you weren't following the rules that it had set out, or if you were trying to do things that weren't in line with that. So if you are the adult beneficiary and you have contractual competency, that's no problem for you. Let's say you have other savings plans, or your regular banking and budgeting, you do that all yourself. Then typically it would be that person who acts as the holder. If they have no contractual competency, so let's say they have no ability to manage any of their finances, and they need their guardian to do that, then it would be their legal guardian who would be the holder. And then there's that sort of gray area where that contractual competency is in question. So let's say somebody might be able to manage their RDSP, but they need a little bit of help, whether it's in understanding things, making the right decisions. Maybe they have challenges with judgment or reasoning or things like that, or maybe they just need someone there to help translate or be able to explain more complicated financial terms with them. In those instances where someone needs help, they can have a qualified family member be the holder of the RDSP. Now, literally up until June of this year, that only counted parents and spouses or common law partners. But as of June of this year, that has now expanded. So now under that provision, you can also have an adult sibling of the beneficiary be the holder. And so this was a really great way of looking at, okay, not every province or territory has something like a representation agreement, as we have in British Columbia, where someone doesn't need to have the legal understanding to create something like a power of attorney, but they can still designate someone to be a representative for them and have that authority to make decisions on their behalf without going through that. And so this was an amazing way, as we know that, many folks don't end up getting married or don't end up having a common law partner. And as folks age, it tends to be the parents that will pass away first. And so that really limits the holder options. And there must always be an eligible holder. So if somebody isn't able to be the holder of their own RDSP, in that instance where, let's say their parent has passed away, maybe they don't have a spouse or partner, then it would have to be a matter of getting guardianship from the province or territory. So something like the Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee. And so this was a great way of having adult siblings be another option, which would hopefully be able to support someone a little bit longer throughout their lifetime. Than that. Outside of that, some other changes that have been made to the RDSP. It used to be up until, I don't remember exactly what year, but it used to be if you made an early withdrawal when grants and bonds had come in the last 10 years, that you would lose all of the grants and bonds and they would all have to go back to the government. But they've changed that now for that 3-to-1 proportional repayment rule. Outside of that, probably the most notable change that's happened with the RDSP is that if somebody loses their disability tax credit status. So this could happen for a number of reasons. Sometimes it is because somebody is um, no longer having a disability that qualifies them for it. But I think more often than not, when people are eligible and then they lose that eligibility, is because their tax credit expired and they may have lost touch with their medical practitioner. They may not have been able to afford the fee, because some medical practitioners will charge a fee to complete that form. They may have been denied for some reason. They may have forgotten to do it. Like, there's lots of different options that can happen. And so regardless of what the circumstances are, even if somebody loses their disability tax credit approval, their RDSP can remain open. It doesn't have to close. There's no letter needed from a medical practitioner saying they're likely to requalify in 2 years' time. Really, it just will stay open. It's kind of put on pause. I won't go into a deep dive of everything that happens with that, but it can remain open. Normal withdrawals would start at age 60. But if somebody is approved for the disability tax credit again, then basically once that's set up, the RDSP will resume and be active again. So it doesn't have to close because of that. And I think those are some of the most important changes that have happened, at least in the last few years with the RDSP.
It's very good because you can see that the government is trying to improve these financial tools so it can be more accessible and easier to use for everyone, which is nice
Mhm.
because I think they are understanding what are the needs of the people and acting regarding that.
Mhm.
So, are there any stories that stand out where the RDSP not only provide financial security but also promote maybe social inclusion or a sense of belonging for people with disabilities?
Yeah, I mean, I think the RDSP is a really great tool that people can use to help build that financial security. I think that so often the feedback that we hear from folks is that it's such a relief that they have a way that they can save money and not worry about impacting their other benefits. I mean, before the RDSP, outside of the asset limit that each province and territory's income assistance program would set, there was no ability to save any money because it was going to be clawed back dollar for dollar. So they would try to save up for their future. And all of a sudden, they are losing the benefits that they rely on for today. And so it's been a really great tool to support people through that. I mean, so often we'll hear whether it's, again, a parent or an individual themselves, just that relief of knowing, okay, I've got this financial security. This is that extra piece. I know that now I have the opportunity of actually realistically being able to buy my own home when I'm older in life, especially for folks who don't have money that they can deposit into the account but are young enough and can get those bonds. Again, that's just some extra money that they have without having to do anything other than keep the account open and have their income tax be filed every year. Um, so that can be really great. And then two, especially for folks who are older, so say they're in their 50s, a lot of people who will decide to open an RDSP in their 50s when they can't get those grants and bonds anymore, it'll be because they've received a large sum of money that they want to protect and not be clawed back. So like for example, there was one person who actually was able to receive, I think over a few years in their 50s, they were able to deposit the full $200,000 in personal contributions because they received a few different inheritances over those years. They put that money into the RDSP and it was invested. And even though it was only invested for a few years, by the time they were reaching out to us, around age 62 and talking about withdrawals and the amounts and what the rules were, their account had over $500,000. It had more than doubled in just a few years' time from them putting that in there. And two, folks will often reach out with smaller inheritances, maybe a few thousand, maybe a few tens of thousands of dollars of money, but that they can just put in there. It's invested. They don't have to worry about it. And if you're someone who's able to deposit more money than the government, even by $1 by the time you're ready to take withdrawals, there's significantly more flexibility in terms of how much money you can get per year, whether you can close your RDSP and take the full amount of funds in there. And so I think really it's a great tool that folks can use to build up their sense of empowerment and a way for folks to be a little bit less concerned about just surviving and be able to thrive. So being able to use that money to open up more opportunities where maybe they don't have to work as much, maybe they don't have to be homebound as much, maybe they can engage more in activities, maybe they can go on a vacation, or they can go to a big concert or a sporting event or something that they like. So just having that ability to engage more in community because they're less concerned about that financial security and stability, which so many folks are facing.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you. And it's important to remind that there are a lot of organizations that help people to apply for it, to also act as a beneficiary in case you don't have any family or friends that can help you with that. And just to conclude this interview and this information about the RDSP, how can people contact or connect with you to understand better the RDSP program or have more information or assistance?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Plan Institute currently hosts RDSP.com. So, probably if you search RDSP, we're going to be one of the search results that you will find. We've had that website probably since 2008, honestly. We're very on top of it, very invested in that movement. And so, RDSP.com is great because there's lots of different resources that are on there. We have an RDSP tutorial, which really goes step by step, everything you need to know about the RDSP. We have an RDSP calculator where you can actually actually put in your age, your, when you were DTC approved, how much money you might be able to deposit, if any, and your investment strategy. So whether you're going to go conservative, expect maybe a 1% rate of return, or very aggressive, doing like a 9% rate of return. So we've expanded that. That's also bilingual, so English and French. And you can kind of see what your RDSP could look like. It shows both in a graph, a pie chart, and then I think you can get like a few different versions of prints out of that as well. So you can review that information, see what it might look like for you. We've also got a blog, several downloadable resources, and as well planinstitute.ca. Under our Learning Center, workshops and webinars, there's the RDSP. We have free RDSP level 1, which is intro, and then level 2, which is a bit more advanced. RDSP workshops that happen every single month, usually alternating between 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. Pacific to start, but it is recorded, emailed out to all of the registrants afterwards. And you can also call our free disability planning helpline service at any time. So that phone number is 1-844-311-7526. And you can also send an email to info@rdsp.com.
Well, very complete. Thank you. Yeah, I checked the website. That's how I get in contact with you, in touch with you. And it's very, very complete. So I know that it's an incredible tool for people so they can go and take a look. So Liz, thank you so much for doing this with us today. This has been very, very rewarding, and we now can better understand these important financial tools so people can have like that safety for the future.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you again for chatting with us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.